Large collaborative projects offer opportunities for more funding for more ambitious projects, but they have a lot of pitfalls. You have to consider who on the team is getting which responsibilities. You have to consider how the money is slotted into different categories, and also whether each institution is submitting individually in a collaborative linked proposal, which is one of the possibilities through NSF, or perhaps you're doing it as a subcontract, or where a subaward is built into your grant. So you have one lead institution, and that lead institution gets all the funding, but then there are subawards that institution makes to one of the partners or collaborators. When reviewers look at your budget on a big project like this, what they're going to do is look to see if the work that you've said you want to do and that your team is going to do is something that can be funded and actually be carried out by the amount of money that's been budgeted, or if perhaps the amount of money that's been budgeted is a bit excessive. So it's very, very important to think about what the team members' responsibilities are, what exactly is entailed in the cost to carry out those responsibilities and duties, and how to put that into the budget and justify it in the budget in a way that that's a cost that's clearly essential for doing that work. One aspect of grants is that organizations submit grants on behalf of the principal investigator. And there are two kinds of costs. There's direct costs. So that would be something like your personnel costs, your fringe benefits for the personnel, travel, equipment, materials, supplies. And so these costs are what you're actually spending to do the work of the grant. But institutions have a tax, and we call this indirect costs. And so what that might mean if your institution has a 25% indirect cost rate is that if you propose $100 worth of work, that 25% tax will mean that your grant is actually $125. So that's sort of how we can think about it in simple fractions. So the indirect cost rate is very important when you're doing your budgeting for these large projects, because the budgeting gets big quickly. And what you want to consider are things like, if you have one lead PI, what that will ultimately mean is that one person is given the key credit and responsibility for the activities of the grant. And in some projects, it might be helpful for that credit to be shared. So if you've got a young investigator, for example, who's wanting to build their record and show the evidence of their own grantsmanship, this would be a place where you might want that person to be a lead on a collaborative proposal and have two institutions getting funding through the collaborative linked mechanism at NSF. But it might also be that you have one person who's willing to take on all the administrative tasks of budgeting, of managing the team, and it might be more efficient and effective to have a single lead PI, but to have a team of collaborators. Again, the collaborator funding could be parceled out in a number of ways. One way might be this collaborative linked proposal mechanism. Another way might be to build in people as consultants in the consultant line of the grant. Another way, depending on what kind of activity is involved, might be participant costs. The wonderful thing about the participant category is that it doesn't involve getting indirect costs charged on them. So if participant costs are a more appropriate category for the activities that you're going to be doing, it's very important to consider if you can put costs into that category. And that's something that your program officer can help you with. It's a great way to take advantage of expenses that need to be paid but are appropriate for that category, and therefore don't add that tax, that indirect cost rate that inflates the overall cost of the budget. Just a note on the indirect cost rate. What this is for is the institutional costs in carrying out the work. It is a lot of work to administer a grant. There's paperwork that has to be done. You have to be in compliance with federal regulations. There's accounting that needs to be done. There's electricity. If you're doing work in a site, someone's got to pay the electric bill, water bills. So there's a lot of different hidden costs of any institution that's carrying out this work, whether it's a tribe, whether it's a nonprofit organization, or whether it's a university or tribal college. So what this mechanism does is it allows those institutions to recover some of their costs for doing the work that actually needs to be done. So I've mentioned the linked collaborative NSF submissions. This is a great mechanism for taking two collaborators and putting them together in a proposal where you have a single joint narrative, but what you have are two people getting credit for this grant, two people with responsibility for this grant, each at their own institution, and also each PI, each co-PI, will have to have their own budget and budget justification. So it's a great way, again, for everyone who's contributing to the project to have ownership of their portion of the budget and to get credit for that and to have responsibility for that. But it allows you to benefit because you can have a single narrative that is covering the entire project, but individual budgets and budget justifications. So that's a very nice mechanism. It's the collaborative submissions at NSF. And you can tell that these are collaborative proposals because they always have collaborative as the first word of the proposal. Another way a large-scale collaborative project might work could be using subcontracts or be taking personnel and covering those team personnel in consultant categories of the budget. So there's a category called consultant, and this might be experts who are providing some kind of resource for the project. Perhaps it's software writing, or perhaps it's database management, or perhaps it's training, or perhaps it's data transcription. But it's an expert in some area whose efforts are essential for the success of the project, but who might not be actually a lead PI. They're just a major contributor whose efforts, again, are key for the successful completion of this project. So the consultant category is a very handy way to do this. There are various costs a consultant might have: travel, food, lodging, and an honorarium. The consultant category allows you to have this part of your budget that is in the overall cost of the grant, but that person is a line item. And they are basically contributing the work that you've laid out that they're going to do, but they have less responsibility in terms of the overall management of the project. So if you have someone who is providing services, expertise that's essential for the project, but perhaps not at the level that would require a distinct collaborative linked proposal and co-PI status, consultant category is a helpful way to go. So there's another option as well, which is a subcontract award. So it might be the case that in a large collaborative effort, you have a group that's contributing more than an individual consultant, but perhaps not at the level of a full-scale PI responsibility. And you might use the subcontract option for this. So you've got several ways in which you can consider how to parcel out responsibilities, how to apportion costs, how to construct your grant, whether subcontract, whether consultant category, or whether a collaborative linked proposal. These large-scale collaborations really require a lot of thought. It might be better to take your project and to break it into several phases and only ask for funding for one of the phases. So to consider what your timeline is and how realistic those activities are in terms of being able to achieve them, and whether you can actually afford to write a grant that has all the costs covered for those activities. It's very important to kind of put that into consideration because you may have a lot of things that you want to do, but your budget may not let you do them. And you may have a lot of things that you've said you're going to do, but your budget doesn't address those costs. So really think long and hard about who's involved, how well they're justified in your narrative, and how best to structure your funding. One institution, multiple institutions, contracts, consultant categories, so that things are as streamlined and playing to the strengths of the participants involved as best that you can.